Okay, so I know you already finished your activity for this unit, and that's really, really good. But I wanted to go over and read the textbook with you just to maybe compare how much information you got out of the textbook and how much information is there. Because I remember you said that reading comprehension is a bit of a struggle for you. And I feel like part of that is maybe nobody ever really went through with you how a textbook works and how to read it. And I think that's something I would like to talk about as we go through it, because I think it would really benefit you and it might make your coursework a little bit easier going forward. Okay, so first question is, do you read a menu the same way that you read a textbook? Now this is about identifying different reading goals, because the way that we read something is different depending on what the purpose is, right? When you read a menu, what do you usually do? Yeah, okay, so when you read a menu, you're usually just sort of skimming over it. You're just looking for, like, what the price is, just because you need to decide what you would be interested in eating. So you just kind of go, I don't know, I feel like chicken. You don't really need to know everything on the menu in detail as soon as you find the thing that you want, and then you order that thing and you pay for it. But when you're reading a textbook, you have to be a little bit more in depth. You want to go over the different spots. There's different sections that it's structured into, and I feel like that sometimes gets lost in translation a little bit for readers that haven't had a lot of experience reading out of a textbook. So yeah, that's a really good answer. Second question is, if not, what are the differences? We already kind of covered that. So yeah, there are different reading for different goals. If you're reading a textbook, there'd be certain things you're looking for. Likewise, if you're reading a book or listening to a YouTube video, you might be looking for completely different information. Sometimes you're skipping through a gaming tutorial, or maybe you're watching an essay from someone, and that'll really change the way that you engage with the text, and that is perfectly okay. Not everything has to be read the same way because you're doing it for different reasons. So it says, efficient readers read differently depending on what they are reading and their goals. There are 4 basic types of reading behaviors or skills: skimming, scanning, reading for thorough comprehension, and critical reading. Each is explained below, and exercises are provided to give you practice in each. So when we're looking at a textbook, it's really important that we read the context of what's going to be happening. Because if you're skimming through the textbook, you might get a little confused what each of the activities is going to be, or what you're supposed to be doing with the activities. Because some of them are things that give you more context about the idea they're trying to present. Some of them are actual assignments that I'm going to need you to write down and hand in. And then some of them are more just like helpful examples if you're still a little confused on the unit. So let's see. So first section is skimming. It says skimming is quick reading for general ideas. When you skim, you move your eyes quickly to acquire a basic understanding of the text. You do not read everything, and you do not read carefully. You read quickly. Such things as titles, subtitles, topic sentences. You also look at pictures, charts, graphs, icons. Okay, so could you give me some examples of things that you think you might skim through? I think we already just mentioned a couple. Yeah, okay, so those are really good examples of skimming, right? It's something where you're not looking for a specific piece of information, but you kind of need like a broad overview of what's happening just to get an idea of what it's about. Skimming is something we might do if we click on an article and we want to see if we want to read it, but we're not really looking for something specific. It's something we do when we need an idea of what's happening in a social media post, or maybe there's an interesting video and we see the title and we're deciding whether we want to watch it or not. Let's see. Okay, so on the previous page, you were reading an infographic on the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Oh, here we go. Okay, so based on what you read in the infographic, is this a place you would want to travel? why or why not. I know you already wrote this in your notebook, but I just thought it would be kind of good to go over the questions in person as well. Yeah, I don't think it would be a very fun place to visit for some people. I think it would be kind of neat. That's just a personal thing for me, you know? Okay, so what do you think the overall topic of the infographic is? How would you describe it? Yeah, I would say it's an informational graphic about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It goes over things like how big it is. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of details about the environmental effects, some interesting facts. Okay, now it says, look at the subheadings. What information is given in each section of the infographic? That is, what is the general topic of each section? Let's take a look. Okay, so it says, so it covers the area of the Great Garbage Patch. It describes the plastic soup, which is all of the plastics in the water. There's a section on formation and photo degradation. That might be a new thing for you, and I think we will cover that in a couple minutes. Okay. Yeah, okay, now I know this next one is an actual activity, and it's a true or false one. And the thing that I want you to remember is that some of this is going to seem very easy or basic, but it's important that we cover some of these topics because sometimes little nuances of why we do things can get lost. It can really feel like they're just throwing a lot of activities at you and it doesn't really make sense, but there's a structure to the way that units are laid out that is supposed to kind of help build on the concepts to give you a really clear foundation for what they're trying to explain to you. Alright, let's see. Okay, so the garbage patch is a large area of polluted land. True or false? That is correct. Ocean currents affect the location of the garbage patch. Yes, okay. The city of Los Angeles is in danger of the garbage patch washing onto the beach. Let me see. Yeah, so it doesn't really say anything specific about that, so I'd say that one is false. The garbage patch contains materials from both Asia and North America. Yeah, so one of the tricky things about multiple choice, if this should ever come up, is that it can really feel like they're trying to trick you on the test, but the reason that happens is the idea is that if you know the foundation for the concept well enough, you should just know what the right answer is. But it can be a little hard if you struggle with reading to begin with, because there might be answers that look very similar, and if you're just skimming through, it's very easy to get confused and maybe pick the wrong one. So when it comes to things like this, I think I've got a handout on different things to look for in a multiple choice test that I think I could send you just in case. Yeah, and it seems like you've got a pretty good understanding of skimming, so I think this section is okay and we can probably move on. Now, the next one is called Reading for Thorough Comprehension. So it says, when you read for thorough comprehension, you try to understand the full meaning of a reading. You want to know the details as well as the general meaning of the selection. When you've thoroughly comprehended a text, you have done the following things. So these are the goals for when we read and we want to comprehend what we're reading. So it says, 1, you have understood the main ideas and the author's point of view. Is 2, you have understood the relationship of ideas in the text, including how they relate to the author's purpose. You have understood most of the concepts in the passages as well as the vocabulary. Sometimes this involves identifying words or reading them from context or looking them up in a dictionary, and I think one of the next sections is on that. And usually when we read for comprehension, you begin to have an idea of the points of view that are maybe not mentioned, but they're sort of implied. This is called drawing an inference, and it is the beginning of critical reading, which we will be doing, I think, in the next one. Yeah, I know. It feels like a very long unit, but I swear it's going to be over soon. So scanning. So it says scanning is also quick reading, but when you scan, you are looking for something specific. Sometimes you are looking for a number or a word or the name of something. Now, this is generally what students are taught to do when they're reading a textbook, is to go, when was the American Revolution? And then you would find that specific information in the textbook. You would write it down. Probably never read the textbook again. Okay, so first you need to decide exactly what information you are looking for and what form it is likely to take. Yeah, so this is what I mean when I say that textbooks are designed in a certain way. Right? Generally, there's a mix of just an overview of the concept. Sometimes there's more specific activities or supplementary materials, and then occasionally there will be boxes and stuff around that are just focused on maybe giving additional information or interesting tidbits or something like that. So yeah, sometimes it's scanning for a date or time. Sometimes it's looking for a specific idea or keywords in the question. Yeah, so for example, you would turn to the sports section of a newspaper or a website to discover who won a ball game. And you would scan the section of a dictionary based on the letter to find a specific name or a definition for something, sorry. And then when you find what you need, you usually stop reading and don't continue reading the rest of the material, which is fine, because sometimes that is all the information we need from a source, which is why this section is all about different forms of reading. Okay. So this, I think, is one of the more interesting sections. So it says, this activity gives you practice in reading for thorough comprehension. To find out more about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, you might do a web search. So it says the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has published information about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch on the web. Some of it is reprinted below. Read the information and then do the activity that follows. So there is a chart here, and I noticed that you didn't actually fill it out, and I was curious if that might be because you didn't understand what the activity was for or what you're supposed to put in there. Yeah, okay, so my brain got a little confused on this too. So you see how it's separated into the two columns here for the excerpt? That's how we know that that's all the reading section. But then when you look at the bottom, just above the chart, there's this other paragraph that stretches all the way across the page that isn't split into the two columns. That is an indicator for you as the reader that is going to be related to the chart, right? Because it kind of looks like there is no information for what the chart is for, but that's because it's kind of in a weird spot. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to compare the information from the infographic that you just looked at, and then we're going to compare it to the information in the expert, right? And it's separated into these columns and these rows, so it'll be a little bit easier. So let's fill out the infographic one first, since it's already fresh in your brain. So where does the infographic say the garbage patch is? Yeah, so it says it's within the North Pacific Gyre, but it's a little bit hard to tell where it is all the time because it moves around, right? There's lots of ocean currents and everything. Yeah, now it says how big is the Pacific Garbage Patch? Yeah, so it has an estimate in the chart of, what is that, 2,200 kilometers and 800 kilometers wide. And it says almost 3 times more than Spain and Portugal combined. Yeah, okay, so based on the infographic, what would you say the garbage patch is? Yeah, so it's a large area of marine debris according to the infographic. And let's see, according to the infographic, the garbage patch looks like disintegrated plastic objects and particles both on the surface and in the water. And it has a little bit of like a chart there with a little bit more detailed information about what kind of debris you would maybe see there. Yeah, so what's really important is we keep in mind everything that was in the infographic, and then we would look at this section here. So it says, what are the garbage patches? The garbage patch, as referred to in the media, is an area of marine debris in the North Pacific Ocean. The name garbage patch has led many to believe that this area is a large and continuous patch of easily visible marine debris items such as bottles and other litter. This is simply not true. While litter items can be found in this area, along with other debris such as fishing nets, much of the debris mentioned in the media these days refers to small bits of floatable plastic debris. These plastic pieces are quite small and not immediately evident to the naked eye. So they say in the North Pacific Ocean, that's where it would be. How big does it say the garbage patch is? It says the reported size and mass of these patches have differed from media article to article. There is really no accurate estimate on the size or mass of the garbage patch. Okay, so it says what is in the garbage patch. Now this source says plastics, likely because of the abundance of plastic and the fact that some common types of plastic float. And what does it look like? So it says, and this one focuses more on whether you can see it in satellite photos. It says sightings of large concentrations of debris, especially large debris, are not very common. The majority of the debris observed in the garbage patch is small plastic pieces. Small debris pieces are difficult to see due to their size, and many of these pieces may be suspended below the surface of the water, which would make them even harder to see with the human eye. For these reasons, the debris or patch is not visible with existing satellite technology. So mainly this source is focused on the idea that you can't really see it at all. Okay, now this is my favorite section. It's the critical reading section. So it says, when we read critically, we draw conclusions and make judgments about the reading. We ask questions like, what inferences can be drawn from this? Do I agree with this point of view? We often do this when we read, but in some cases it is more important than others. As, for example, when authors give opinions about important issues or when you are trying to make a decision. And this is a good one because everything to do with climate change is a little bit contentious right now. So it's a really good example of comparing two different sources and forming an opinion. So it says, use the infographic and the information that we just read from that excerpt to answer the following critical reading questions. So it said, did your understanding of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch change after you read the information from the NOAA? Yeah, so I'd say both of the sources cover the same topic, but they cover them both in very, very different ways, right? One is a graphic, one is an article. And they're both focused on slightly different aspects of the same thing. And they don't really agree, I would say, at all. There's 1 or 2 points where they do, but in general, there's a pretty stark difference between the two. Number 2, what do you do when you find that information in one source differs from information in another source? So this is asking about What tools in your toolbox are you going to use to determine how reliable something is, and what you're going to do with information if it doesn't really agree with each other? Because sometimes we will read things that are all about the same topic, and they might not agree at all, which is the case with, I think, these two excerpts. Yeah, so it's important when we're looking at different sources of information that we try to determine some sort of context clues and things for us to understand the purposes of the content and why we're reading it and what it means. So that's where I think question 3 comes in. It says, do you think that the infographic is a good source of information about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch now? Why or why not? I would say that's a very interesting interpretation. So I think there used to be a section in here, and I can't seem to find it. But one of the things that we're doing when we assess a text is noticing the bias. So if we look at the different sections in the infographic, we can see that well, I guess it's more of an activity, is where you would look at and you would try to see like what information is put together and why. Because we have to remember that somebody made the infographic and somebody made the excerpt for their website. And that means that there were conscious choices they had to make about how they were going to word things, what they were going to say, which pieces of information they were going to include, which ones they were going to exclude. So if we look at the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, so it talks about the size of the garbage patch. It talks about the fact that not all of it is on the surface. Some of it is floating below. Some of it sinks to the bottom over time. So we don't really have a clear idea of how much is there. Let's see what else. Yeah, so it mentions some problems created by the plastics, like how it affects beaches and marine life. It talks about the formation of it, and it talks about photo degradation and how long it takes to photodegrade the plastic. So when you read this infographic, did you get the impression that the Great Pacific Garbage Patch was good or bad? Yeah, I would say bad. And even though it never explicitly says that anywhere, right? Nowhere in the infographic does it say the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is bad. It's a bad, bad thing. It does kind of lead you to that conclusion in the way that it's formulated, right? Because it first talks about what it is. It talks about how big it is. And generally, when we're trying to understand something in scale, that can make us understand it as a more serious thing. It talks about how it forms, which is, I think, helpful information. And part of that is because if we view this as a problem, one of the questions might be, where does it come from? Because that is how we would understand, oh, there's a root to this problem and a thing that we're supposed to be doing, which it doesn't talk about. It doesn't talk about solutions in the infographic, but there is sort of an implication that it is both a problem and there is something that should be done. One of the things I know we talked about a little bit is when we're looking at suffixes and affixes of a word, and we don't know what it is. So photo degradation. What do you think the photo part in photo degradation means? Yeah, so if we think of other words that have photo, photosynthesis, photography, all of those things generally have to do with light, right? So photo as a, what's it called, a prefix? Photo as a prefix usually has to do with light. So in this case, we know that there's something to do with light that is happening. and degradation. So degradation is generally the breaking down of something, right? If I'm degrading you, I'm being mean to you, and I'm making you feel small or bad. So, yeah, I know when you said you looked up photo degradation earlier, there wasn't... you said that you thought that the plastic disappeared, which isn't really what it's saying here. So it's saying plastic never biodegrades. So that means even though it photodegrades, right, so it's getting smaller and smaller and breaking down because of the light and things that are affecting it, it's not actually like disappearing into the environment in the same way. It's saying it doesn't break down into natural substances. It goes through a photodegradation process, splits into even smaller and smaller parts, which are still plastic, right? So this one, if we think about the infographic overall, it's saying this is a very, very large thing. It's saying it forms from pollution from these specific areas. It's saying that the plastic never goes away, right? It breaks down into microplastics that stay in the environment. And then it has this little chart here where it's talking about the length of time it takes for disposable diapers or plastic rings or plastic bottles to photodegrade, right? So it says a disposable diaper would be 500 years, a plastic bottle would be 450. So if we look at all that together in context, it is kind of saying without saying this is a problem because it never goes away, right? And if we consider the fact that it's saying that it continues to be growing, and we look at the length of time that it says that photodegradation takes, the infographic is kind of saying without saying that this is a problem that will keep building and building because the amount of time it takes to break down is far too long for the amount that's already being put into the ecosystem, and that that it doesn't really go away because you're just reducing it to microplastics. But when we compare it to that excerpt we just read, and we look at the sections, let's see. So it redefines garbage patches. And one of the things I found interesting about your answer is I think there might be some areas where you're not really picking up on sort of bias in the way that it's written. So if we look at it, when we put things in quotes, like the garbage patch, or we say, I really like my food, in quotes, the intonation is different. It's implying that that thing is either technically that thing, but not really that thing, or that it might be a misnomer, which means that it's not really an accurate name for that thing. And that's something they go into detail in here, is they say, the name garbage patch is a misnomer. There is no island of trash forming in the middle of the ocean, nor a blanket of trash that can be easily seen. This is likely because much of the debris found here is small bits of floating plastic not readily visible. Right, so if we look at the overview of the sections for this excerpt, they are specifically talking about the choice of name. They're talking about the fact, and they're kind of vague here, is they're saying that there is no way to know what size it is, so we don't know how big it is. They talk about the main debris type, and they just say plastics, which is again very vague. And they say, can you see it with satellite photos, right? So instead of talking about how it's formed or where it comes from or what those effects would be, it's mostly talking about these very technical little minutiae about the whole idea of the thing. Which is helpful from an informational stance, which is why it could be a good source. But, there are a few things I would say that, like, I personally would read as a little suspicious. So when it says the garbage patch, in quotes, and it says as referred to in the media. Now, why might they mention in the media? What does that kind of imply? Yeah, so I would say that generally when we say something is referred to in the media, we're saying sort of like the general public over there, the journalists. And there's sometimes an implication when we talk about the media that they maybe don't know or sensational, and then perhaps that thing is not accurate or reliable, right? If I were to say, you as a scientist, as referred to in the media, that would kind of make it sound like the media is calling you a scientist, but you might not be. And that's sort of like a little thing that we need to clue into when we're reading. So it says the name the garbage patch has led many to believe that this area is large and continuous. Visible marine debris items, blah, blah, blah. This is simply not true. So they are directly contradicting the other source. And that's something we need to keep in mind, is that these two sources do not agree, and there might be lots of reasons for that. So they mentioned that while litter items can be found in this area, along with other debris, such as, and then it goes ... fishing nets, much of the debris mentioned in the media these days refers to small bits of floatable plastic debris. Now, there's this little decision that's happening here where you'll notice that in the infographic they focus on things like disposable diapers or six-pack plastic rings or plastic bottles. And these are things we would generally all agree don't belong in the ocean, right? Those would be seen as trash. That are things that are not supposed to be there. But when we think about this other source's choice of saying fishing nets, right? When you think of a fishing net, does it really seem that crazy that a fishing net would be in the ocean? Yeah, so even the choice of what people choose to include or not include, right? Because I'm sure there are lots and lots of things that both authors could have listed. But the differences kind of imply different things about the situation. Yeah, so here again, we have the reported size and mass of these, and then it goes in quotes, patches, right? So it's saying that patches, even without saying it, is wrong, right? It's implying that that is incorrect or untrue or maybe sensational. And then they say they've differed from media article to media article. So again, they're focusing on the coverage in the media, right? There's kind of an implication there that because it is covered in the media and because it is inconsistent, it is unreliable information, which could or could not be true. Yeah, so instead of giving us a concrete size or even an estimate, it just says there's no way to tell, which might be honest and it might be accurate, but sometimes that doesn't make it the most informational when we are trying to get a good idea of a situation. Right, so if I were to say, I don't know what I want for lunch, and we were going to pick out food, it's not really very helpful, right? It would be more helpful if I were to at least give an answer like I don't want Indian food, because at least there's something to work with there, right? So I would say in that way, this excerpt specifically is not necessarily helpful information if you are looking for that kind of insight. Okay, so this is another thing I want you to keep in mind, is that word choice matters. When you're doing your assignments later, one of the things I want you to keep in mind is diction. Diction is our word choice, because the way that we choose to describe things can affect how people interpret it, especially if they're reading very quickly or not really thinking about the content. You'll notice here that in the infographic, they use words like garbage and litter and trash, which create a certain image of something that's like gross or bad or not where it's supposed to be, especially when we're talking about the ocean and marine life. And they talk about the marine life especially is actually a good example. But here, they use very, very technical, very, very clean language. They say things like plastic debris. Right, they keep saying small debris pieces. That is like the main thing that they use to describe it. And saying things like plastic pieces, it's sort of like a sanitized version of the idea, which for the NOAA might be because they're trying to be very technical and informative, especially because it's the Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, so they might have more of an obligation to be neutral on the subject because they're providing this information in this way. But that means that their intentions will be different than the author of the infographic, who is trying to sort of imply a certain kind of message of what needs to be done or what should be done or if there is a problem in the first place. And maybe not in this particular case, but it's something important to keep in mind. So I don't know if you're familiar with 1984. It's a really good book. I don't know if you ever get a chance to read it. You might want to read through it. There's a lot of really interesting concepts in there. And one of them is that there's a lot of emphasis on the changing of names or redefining things to be more palatable, right? So they'll take something like the Department of Justice or whatever, and they'll change it into the Department of Fairness or whatever. Or they'll take the Department of War or whatever that would be. I can't remember. I haven't read the book in a while, right? So it'll be something specific dedicated to war or foreign affairs or whatever. And in the book, it'll be called something like love and friendship or whatever. And the idea is that when we take something that is unpalatable or unpleasant and we make it very sanitized, it's easier for people to not really think too hard about that information. Likewise, we could take something very simple like garbage or litter, which is a very easy term that is simple for people to understand and to visualize, and we turn it into something like marine debris or plastic floatable marine debris, right? The more technical and complicated we make it, the easier it is for people to just sort of absorb the information and move on, which is really important when we're reading critically, because the way that we describe things can have a huge effect on how it's interpreted and how much people think about it. Right? So I bet when reading the infographic, you probably had a very different reaction than reading this excerpt about this situation and whether it would count as a problem and what the purpose of the information was, whether you consciously knew about it or not. And that's something really important to keep in mind while we're going through the rest of the unit. Okay. Yeah, so it seems like exercise 2 and 3 are pretty much exactly the same. So I think you would be okay to skip this. I think the only assignment for this unit is a reading summary one, which isn't too bad. And one of the things I would urge you is that when you're going through a textbook, you don't need to do everything in a unit if it's not part of an assignment. But it is important to at least get a firm idea, right? If you were going through this first exercise and you didn't feel very confident in it, it might be helpful to do another one of the exercises. But if you go through that one and you're like, oh, that was easy, I completely understood it. And what I mean by understood is not just how to do the assignment. Because I think it's easy to think that just completing the assignment is the goal. It's understanding the concepts. Right, so if you went through this and you said, oh, I understand why they're making me do this and what the function of this assignment is, then you're probably good to sort of skip ahead a little bit because you have a clear idea. But yeah, it is most important to understand the function of the unit and what it is for. Okay, and I think it's good if we take a break. Maybe we can have a snack or something. My voice is getting kind of sore. And then I think we can continue with stems and affixes in about 15 minutes. So yeah, go take a break, have some water, and we will give it 15 minutes, and then we'll go back to the rest of it. I know it's kind of a long unit, but we're almost done.